These are the ends that they go onto this bar here, this rod here, and then the flying cables, the elevator cables, hook onto these. They have an eye in them that goes through this hole here on these. These are got a little yoke, they fit over that, and then they fit between here, and that's what operates the elevator cables. I'm getting set up to put the torque tube in, and I've fitted it in a couple of times, once to figure out where to put the hole in this bulkhead right here for the elevator cables to go through, and then to kind of figure out how to cut out the hole for the turning for the yoke as it pivots back and forth for the aileron control, and a couple other things I've put it in for, to fitting in some stuff, and had them all cleaned up and stuff. But just over the last, it's been a little less than a year since the last time I polished them, but they got a little surface rust on them. So I got the Dremel tool out with a wire wheel on it and cleaning the rust up. I had to see whether I'm going to polish them any more than that or not, but I'll get those cleaned up. I wire brushed the bearing surfaces on the torque tube down on the big wire wheel. I had to clean some paint off of the rear mount. Now these two saddles are closer together. That front one is back quite a bit from what the other one was, so the bearing points are not quite the same on there. And it was kind of rough. It was gouging into the torque tube when I put it in there, even just loose, twisting it back and forth. So I did take a file on the front one and kind of trim it up a little bit where it mounts onto that mount, where the saddle is welded in there to that mount, and then I knocked off the sharp edges on it, smoothed it up a little bit, trued it up a little bit with a file, and then there was sharp points on those saddles where they're cut off on the halves there. I just rounded those over a little bit. Seems to work better. Well, that's better. That smoothed those out, polished them out a little bit. I got that torque tube put together and fitted in there. I spent probably 15 minutes looking for what I did with these end caps. I put them away where they wouldn't get lost and they'd be out of the way, and then I couldn't find them when I wanted them. But you can see how much clearance there is here. This is how far back that torque tube sits on there compared to what it was in the other airframe. And anyway, I got that cap put on there. Now I'm missing screws. There's stop screws that go in here and these little ears that stick up. They're supposed to be 1/4-20 bolts that fit in there, and they need to be threaded the full length of them. And I had my mechanic try to go to find me some at Fastenal or someplace, and I don't remember whether he ever sent them for me or not, but I can't find them around here, so I've got to see what I can do about finding some. Most of the ones I've found here that long are not threaded the full length, so they won't screw in far enough. What you do is you put a stop nut or a nut on them and then thread them in here, and then you can adjust them out for the angle of travel for the ailerons. The forward cap, found it and put it on there. The bottom one was pretty tight and gouging in the rings on that. There's 2 rings welded on that tube that act as stops forward and backwards on there. Okay, there's the rings, and the caps receptacle it sits in. It was a little bit tight to fit in between those caps. I filed it down and smoothed the edges of it up to where they fit down in there better, and then I put that cap on there, and it's too tight to fit in that in between those stops on that torque tube, so I'll have to take it off and take it to the belt sander and take a little bit off of both sides. I've got the forward stick in, and it's just sitting in there. The only reason I put it on there for now was to make sure that I had that lower section there, the part that pivots, that goes, I don't know what that's called, but it goes down into the torque tube. It pivots back and forth, and I wanted to make sure I got it in the right direction so the holes line up correctly for that stick to slide on there. There's a hole that goes through from forward to back, or back to forward, depending on which way you're looking at it, that the bolt goes in. To attach that stick And that's why I put it on there, is to make sure those holes get lined up properly. I didn't do as much to that front cap as I thought I was going to. I just took it out here to the belt sander and took a little bit off of each, both the front and the back on each side of it, and took a file and deburred the edges and took the points off the corners. Then I took the Dremel tool with a wire wheel and polished it up a little bit with that. There's no back and forth movement on the thing now. But I took everything off and daubed a little bit of grease on the bottom, on the pockets, the sockets for it, and put the yoke back in there and spun it around, or the torque tube back in there and spun it around, and it slid easier. And I put a little bit on the top of the torque tube there where the bearing caps go, and then put the caps on it, and it slides pretty good now. Kind of come to a stop here on what I could do. Well, I can still do some work on this torque tube. I got to find the shims or make new shims for it to put those caps in, but I can't really put the caps on until I get the bolts for it. So I've got to order those. That's sitting where it's going to be, so I can go ahead and cut the elevator cables and get those lined in there.